Mr. Friedkin, if I'd just like to recap on the films that you've already directed. Good Times, That Night They Raided Minsky's, The Boys in the Band, French Connection, and now The Exorcist. All very unusual scripts.
Mm-hmm.
Which film did you enjoy directing the most?
The most challenging was The Exorcist, of course. I don't think in terms of enjoying filmmaking. It's very, very hard work, mentally and physically, to try and achieve one's fantasies on film in what is essentially a two-dimensional medium, to try to suggest depth, not simply depth of character and story, but depth on the screen. There's so many problems associated with putting something on film, creative and technical problems, that one doesn't have time to enjoy it, really. I can't ever say the experience was enjoyable. The editing is what I enjoy. I've enjoyed the editing of all these films. I think the most fun I had editing was on The French Connection because of that chase sequence. But The Exorcist is by far the most challenging film I've made.
The French Connection, you won an Oscar, of course, for your direction of The French Connection. Tell me, does that do something for a director in the same way that it does something for an actor in terms of more work?
Well, I'll tell you what it did for me. It really is something to live up to. It's a challenge to which one has to respond. I don't think anyone, any filmmaker, ever thinks that he's deserving of that kind of accolade from his colleagues, you know, an Academy Award. No one is deserving of it. It comes to you, fortunately. It's the most important recognition one can have, the recognition of one's own colleagues. To me, what it did was, when I won the Academy Award a couple of years ago, it made me think, I really have to live up to this because it's so important. What that translates down to, Don, is that you don't just do any sort of picture next. You know, you don't just do another film that is marginal for the money or to keep working. You try to make a film as good or better than the last one to sort of uphold the tradition of the Academy Award.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned technical problems. There must have been quite a few technical problems on The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
Could you perhaps tell us some of the...
Well, you know, you have the problem of the complete physical and mental alteration and deterioration of a human being, including supernatural effects surrounding that alteration and deterioration. The main problem was to try to do these effects in such a way that they've never been done before. And in this particular film, The Exorcist, I decided that we would achieve all of these effects live in the studio, that there would be no use of trick photography, no opticals, but that everything that appears on screen would have been achieved as we photographed it, such as the levitation and the physical alteration of the girl's face and body. Everything, as I say, was done on the set, except for the vocal effects, which was a very complicated process done afterward. I don't want to say too much about how we did it, because I think it would limit an audience's enjoyment if they knew exactly how the sleight of hand is performed.
You began to think at one time that in the making of the film that it was perhaps jinxed. Do you still feel that?
Well, jinxed isn't really my word. You know, I mean, I've heard all these stories about the supernatural hovering around the set, and I must say that I never felt that. We had a lot of unusual occurrences. Our set burned down one day, a Sunday morning, with no one in the building. A fire broke out that completely destroyed the set, which was the interior of a two-story house with 7 rooms and an attic and a basement. The whole thing burned down one morning for no reason. Then periodically the sprinkler system in the studio where we were filming would erupt and flood the entire set. But I suppose since the film was made, since the soundstage was located in a section of New York known as Hell's Kitchen, I suppose we could have expected something like that. But no, I don't attribute it to the supernatural.
Do you believe that a person can be possessed?
put it this way. I believe that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in either your philosophy or mine. I think it is possible. You know, I've never seen Australia, but I believe that it's there. Do you know what I mean? In my research into so-called demonic possession, I came away with the conclusion that if these cases of so-called demonic possession were in fact not demonic possession, then what they were diseases for which there is no name and no cure.
Well, of course, we all have a certain amount of good and a certain amount of evil in us.
Yes.
Perhaps that's what this film is really about.
Yes, I think
If
so.
one
Dan.
wants to divorce the possible possession of a child by a demonic spirit,
Yes.
discounting that, then this film perhaps might be a deeply religious film in the sense that when everything else failed, religion triumphed. I mean, did you feel that about the film? Did
Oh,
you feel
yes.
that you're making something deeply religious in that sense?
Well, it's always sounds a bit crass to say that, unless one is a theologian. I believe very strongly in the power of God and the power of the human soul. I also believe that they're unknowable. But the film, The Exorcist, is primarily about the mystery of faith, the mystery of goodness, that mystery which is just inexplicable, but it's there, and you believe. And we know that a lot of incredible things have occurred in human history simply because of belief, simply because people have believed that it was possible. Now, The Exorcist is based on an actual case, as you may know, which took place in 1949 in the United States in Georgetown, D.C. Actually, the case took place in a suburb of Washington, D.C. And again, medical science went as far as it could with this particular victim, and the exorcism was performed as a last resort.
Do you feel that perhaps, that was in 1949, I
Yes.
believe, the original case.
Yes.
Do you think that perhaps in the ensuing 20, 25 years, that psychiatry has reached a certain stage where perhaps if that had happened now, we know perhaps more about the condition of the mind and the physical side, that perhaps it might not have been a case of demonic possession?
No, I
Are
don't.
you still...
No, I don't. I'll tell you why. Because psychiatry recognizes something called somnambulistic possession, which is the victim's belief that he or she is in fact possessed by a demon or a devil. Now, psychiatry treats this in a fashion similar to exorcism. Given the victim's belief that he or she is possessed, the belief in the power of the exorcism very often works. It is when these very weird alternation of personalities occur, and the symptoms of possession are classic, from going back to Loudon and beyond. The symptoms are classic: obscenity, vile obscenities, complete personality transformation, and more important, supernatural acts or inexplicable acts surrounding the victim. That's when psychiatry and internal or external medicine are helpless. And then the victim, either an exorcism is performed or the victim is led to further observation, which is to say a mental institution. And mental institutions are full of such people for whom there is no cure for what's troubling them.
Fine.
You hear strange noises, Dan?
Yes, I do indeed, yes.
Be careful when you're driving home.
I'm told you have a tremendous aptitude for picking unusual scripts. Do they come to you or do you look for them?
Everything happens by osmosis in terms of fate. You know, we control our own destinies, I think, only up to a point. But overall, I believe that fate controls our destinies. I mean, I started in this business because I applied for a job. I went to the wrong place at the right time. The job I was looking for was in Chicago, Illinois. It was in a building across the street from where I actually went. I went to the wrong building, got a job in that particular building in the mailroom of a television station, and worked my way up to live TV director. Whenever you start actively looking for something, it doesn't usually come. It's when you just let it happen. I picked up The Exorcist novel, I read not, I read by accident. Well, actually, I stole the book off my lawyer's shelf. You know, it was sitting there up on his shelf, and I stole it and read it, and it just moved me profoundly.
How much has film, was film very important to you as a young man? You know, Truffaut, for instance, spent most of his years, from 14 to 20, he said that he was educated in a film house, in a cinema. I was wondering what kind of effect film had on you at a younger age, and did you always aspire to become film director?
Well, not always. When I started thinking about what I wanted to do with myself, the first thing I wanted to do was become a basketball player. First collegiate and then professional. I, like most young people of my generation, and as Truffaut depicts this anecdote in his latest film, Day for Night, I was influenced by Citizen Kane. There's a wonderful sequence in Day for Night where you see a young man running down the street and late at night, and he slips into a motion picture theater and he steals the photographs from Citizen Kane. I knew everything there was to know about Citizen Kane shortly after I saw it, at about the age of, I guess, 16 years old. Citizen Kane is a quarry for filmmakers, just as James Joyce's Ulysses is a quarry, has been a quarry for writers ever since it was written. It was really having seen Citizen Kane done that made me know that that's what I wanted to do, make films, make something like that with that much power, impact, resonance in people's lives. And I guess I was 16 when that happened.
And yet you went via television. Like so many directors, film directors, you went via television.
Yes, well, I was living in Chicago at the time, and it wasn't too easy to put my hand on a rock and say, now I am a filmmaker, or, you know, tomorrow I'm going to do what Orson Welles did 20 years ago or something. I got into live television in Chicago. I answered an ad in a newspaper, and I started in the mailroom of a television station. The advertisement said you could work your way up into the communications field, and that looked like a good idea. I had barely graduated from high school and had no desire to go to college, and there was a fellow called George Mikan, who was a star basketball player then. He was 7 feet tall, and I was about 5'10" or 11, and I figured I wasn't going to be too effective against that fellow. So I decided that I would try for a career in television. I was in the mailroom of this television station for about a year before I got the chance to direct. This was in the early days of live TV in America, when there were no schools, no training programs for directors. You literally worked your way up from the ranks and you became a director, and that's what happened to me. I directed about 2,000 live television programs before I ever did anything on film.
Did you find it was that transition from television to film? I mean, you know, in the television studio you've got a box there, and then suddenly you've got this tremendous freedom in film. Mm-hmm. Did you find it difficult to make that transition? Obviously you didn't, but I mean, once you got into filming from television, what was the first difficulty you felt that you had to overcome?
The techniques are totally different from live TV to any kind of either film, television, or motion picture features. The technique is totally different. So you have to, you know, learn how to load a camera. You have to learn what the capabilities of sound are, what the microphones can do, what the mixers can do. But basically, primarily, after you've learned this, which can be taught, by the way, you can be taught how to operate a camera, or you can be taught what the effect is when you move a light from there to there, or what kind of light you use. But the main thing that direction is storytelling and communicating with people. First of all, the director is communicating to his writers and to the people with whom he works. Then he is communicating through his actors to an audience. And that's something that can't be taught. That's something that's highly instinctive. It involves, first of all, I would think you have to like people and enjoy communication, which I do. That's what directing really is. I mean, some of the best directors I've known of wouldn't, never look into that camera, and wouldn't know what they were seeing if they did. When I started, I freely admit that I relied to an enormous extent on the capabilities of the people I worked with. I still do. I still do.
To get back to, you mentioned sound, so I suppose we really should get back to The Exorcist. And in The Exorcist, I noticed the tremendous use of sound.
Yes.
Very well used. And I was wondering what contribution there you made in the sense that it was very, 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 very right for the script.
Well, the sound involved a lot of experimentation, a lot of error and trial. There were any number of ideas I had about sound that I tried that didn't work. And I worked on the soundtrack for that picture. That is, the crew and I worked on the soundtrack for almost 7 months of just trying to reproduce, to do the demon voice in such a way that it was convincing.
Yes, I was going to ask you about the demon voice.
Well, I felt that we should use a woman's voice for the demon and not a man.
Yes.
And that's not implicit in the novel or in the screenplay. It just occurred. I had an inspiration that the demon voice should sound female or neutral. Let's put it that way. But then we put the voice through an electronic treatment, very simple, as a matter of fact, treatment to give it that harsh, abrasive quality that it has. But the effects were all created very strangely. The sounds. I did a lot of reading about what kind of sound, for example, works on people's nerves. And I'll give you one illustration of one particular sound effect that's in the film, which came out of my research into what sort of sounds, in terms of pitch and volume, work on people's psyche. One of the sounds in the film is produced by recording a bee inside of a jar, and it's a very close mic pickup of a bee buzzing around in a jar, and that is re-recorded 16 times, wherein the pitch of each particular recording of this bee is altered in terms of the keyboard, the piano keyboard. The pitch is raised each time by a 16th. Added to that, or mixed in with that sound, is a recording of pigs being led to slaughter. And so it's the combination of the pigs in a slaughterhouse and 16 variations of a bee in a bottle that mixed together produce a sound that is otherwise impossible to describe. But when people hear it in the theater, they begin to go like this. Sound is something which hasn't even begun to be explored in film. Some of the best directors, filmmakers, think in terms of the camera, which is, of course, very important, maybe most important. But I, for one, am either as interested or more interested in the use of sound in a film. And I spend a lot of time with soundtracks in everything I do.
William Blatty, who was the author of the book, of course, The Exorcist, the producer of the film, and also he wrote the scenario.
Yes.
How much did you collaborate with him on the scenario, or was it brought to you complete?
Oh, no, we worked very closely on the screenplay, because really when a screenwriter, and Blatty is one of the best screenwriters, and but when a screenwriter and a director work, I guess the best way to describe, it's almost like the writer is making a suit for the director. You know, he is making something that has to feel comfortable for the director, otherwise he can't direct. So it's a highly collaborative thing. I mean, it's not dictatorial. I mean, I never say, Bill, we're going to do it this way, and he does it. It's a very free and open give and take. A lot of the ideas will start with me. A lot of the ideas will originate with him. But let me be very plain about it. The idea for The Exorcist, the novel, originated with Bill Blatty. Any effectiveness that this film may have, in my opinion, is primarily due to this magnificent achievement that Blatty originated when he wrote the novel, and then this brilliant screenplay. It was a very rewarding collaboration for me.
I was wondering if you ever discussed the change from the original case, a young boy, changing that particular case into a girl, using a girl as the person
Yes.
possessed.
Well, of course, the original case upon which the novel and the film are based took place in Washington. It involved a 14-year-old boy in 1949. Blatty made it a 12-year-old girl because he knew of a similar girl and her mother
I see, I understand.
when he fictionalized it.
Yes. Of course, it was much more dramatic anyway for the film to have a,
Oh, yes.
a girl for
Most
yes,
of the
yes.
cases of possession involve young girls rather than young boys.
Yes, I see. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Don.
Thank
It was
you.
a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Phil.